Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we shall be asking, is the Labour Party being unduly influenced by Islamist forces, which is having a direct impact not only on domestic policy but also foreign policy. And in this programme today I'm joined by Tim Dieppe from Christian Concern and Alistair Scott's Vision for Israel UK. Tim, it's great to see you back on the programme.
Thank you, Sam.
And on behalf of myself and our viewers, we all appreciate the hard work being done by Christian Concern to defend our Christian freedoms in this country. But you've written a new book, according to my notes here, The Challenge of Islam, Understanding and Responding Islam's Increasing Influence in the UK. Just share a little bit.
We're delighted we're going to launch this book next week. Next month in central London on February the 6th. And it'd be great to see people there. And then it will be available in bookshops on Amazon, CLC, Revived and Equipping the Church and places like that, and other Christian bookshops and so on. It's really talking about Islam, the influence of Islam in our society, and something about the nature of Islam, something about how much it's influencing our society today, and something about how we as Christians and as a society can respond to that. So it's obviously very topical today, Sarah, with lots of aspects of news, not least grooming gangs, but also various terrorist attacks and so on that have been going on. And Christians need to really clue up on Islam. I think previously we've had to think about atheism and Marxism and various other LGBT type ideologies, and Islam is really rising to the fore and becoming a much stronger influence, I think, in our society, and one that we really need to learn how to resist well.
Absolutely, no, very timely book, so thank you for that one, Tim. And Alistair, well done for the great job that you and Reagan do on the persecuted church. And of course, when we unpack the programmes on the persecuted church and looking at the kind of discrimination and attacks against Christians, we find very much, don't we, that where we have nations that introduce Sharia law, this is where we see the real persecution of Christians in the third world.
Yes, and similar to what Tim was saying, it's about really informing the body of Christ as to the danger of the spread of Islam in the nations. And as you say, when we're doing the persecuted church, of the top 30, I would say 90% of those nations where the persecution against Christians are highest are Islamic nations, and they are radical Islamic nations where Sharia law is just a normal part of their lives. But we've got to be aware that there is, as Tim has just said, there's a move and a spreading of Islamic thought, ideology in our nation too, and there are areas where Sharia law is got an effect in parts of our community. So it is important for us to be alerted and not be too apathetic about the situation and be prayerful, and confront our own MPs as to the problem that is around us. There are parts of London where it's very dangerous to be a Christian.
Yeah, and Tim, share with us the extent of Islamification in this country and in our society, and why should we all be concerned about it?
Well, I think one of the things that was new really was the last election last year, and you saw this emergence of this new group or movement called the Muslim Vote, who are campaigning to get Muslims voting for independent candidates, independent Islamic candidates on a very clearly Islamic agenda. And they got 5 independent MPs in there, but also massively reduced the majorities of lots of particularly Labour MPs. Labour had previously been able to just rely on the Labour vote. And the vote for the Muslim vote candidates really was almost directly in proportion to the number of Muslims in each constituency. And the number of constituencies where it's enough to swing the vote is ever increasing and has gone up by quite a lot since the last election. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you see an Islamic political party coming up. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you see, I think we have seen really Labour sort of worrying about the Muslim vote, as in the concept of the Muslim vote, not necessarily the movement, because they know that their majorities were slashed very significantly by this, and they got in their seats, but only just, quite a lot of them having had massive majorities massively cut by this. And so I think this is a very strong indicator of the influence of Islam starting to affect our politics now, not just our culture in this country.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And Alistair, share with us, really ever since October the 7th and the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, where more Jewish people died on one single day that we haven't actually seen since the Holocaust over 80 years ago. But also October the 7th was also a pivotal moment, I think, in this nation's history politically, because we've seen that the Islamic fundamentalists were flexing their political muscles. They're unifying over the Gaza cause to the extent now that we have 6 independent members of parliament who won their seats in the last election purely standing on a pro-Gaza platform. Just share with us how our politics is being changed and influenced by this growing Islamization in this country.
Well, Tim's made the point very well there that that the political parties are looking to get the votes of Islamic people onto their side, and therefore there's a lot of pressure put on them to just conform in some ways and not to highlight the problem, that the potential problem that is there. And as you say, I mean, some of these the new MPs have come into Parliament were very openly pro-Palestine, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, and they're out with very many of them were even caught speaking at their rallies very much against the Jewish community. So it is a very worrying structure. I mean, even the amount we forget in so many ways that October the 7th was such a horrendous time, and initially most nations and most governments and most leaders of governments were speaking so for Israel, the right to defend itself, and within days the pro-Palestinian protesters that were out on our streets and are still out on the streets seemed to get all the headlines, and the anti-Semitism, which was so rife, has continued to go that way, and it's almost like we've looked at it the other way, that the problem is...
One of the chapters in this book is called Is Islam Anti-Semitic? So I did a debate last year with Professor Reza Aslan in the States on exactly that question, is Islam anti-Semitic? I was surprised to be asked, because I'm not a professor and he is, and he's written some New York Times best-selling books. But I just thought, well, the evidence is so strong, why don't I just do it? And I quoted from the Quran multiple times, and from the Hadith, and then from historical theologians and contemporary theologians, and the examples of what's happened in history. And Islam, as defined by its texts and example of its followers and so on, is anti-Semitic, and that predates the Arab-Israeli conflict. It's integral to it, and this is why we're seeing a massive rise in anti-Semitism in this country today, and it's not widely recognised and widely talked about.
And it's also pushed under the carpet because this is represents the most violent form of the anti-Semitic attacks that we've been seeing, certainly since October the 7th. But on that subject, though, I think our viewers have to really understand, don't they, Tim, that those 6 elected members of Parliament who stood on one platform alone, the issue of Gaza, is an indication that they share the same ideology of that of Hamas. Otherwise, why else would you be raising the cause of the situation in Gaza, rallying around this point?
Well, I mean, amongst the demands of the Muslim vote was a free Palestine kind of thing, create Palestinian states and all that kind of stuff was in there. There were other very explicitly Islamic demands, like have Sharia pensions in every workplace, like adopt the definition of Islamophobia that's been widely touted by the APPG that restricts free speech in relation to Islam. And various other demands relating to that, some of them relating to Palestine, as you said. So yes, I mean, they're very explicitly Islamic, unashamedly Islamic. They call themselves the Muslim vote. So yes, very clearly like that. And not only those 5 MPs, but also a lot of the Labour MPs were trying to be endorsed by the Muslim vote. And they reckoned that they actually got 50 MPs who they were endorsing in our parliament today who signed up to their policies. So that's a bit less than a tenth of all the MPs there.
Yeah, and just unpack for our viewers as well the undue influence that political Islam is having on Keir Starmer, both in terms of domestic policy and also British foreign policy as well, of this government.
Well, foreign policy, I mean, it's all about how they're responding to what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, in Gaza and so on, all of that kind of stuff. In terms of contemporary policy, I worry about these grooming gangs and all of that that's going on, Simon. There's a very serious reticence to mention Islam or religion at all in terms of what's been going on, even though when you read the stories of these victims, many of them say that they were forced to recite the Quran, have Sharia marriages, taught that Islam teaches them that they're allowed to rape women from a different culture and all of that kind of thing. and so on that was going on, and that they could disrespect people from another culture and call them kafir and all of this kind of stuff. And this Islamic motive is not being studied now. You know, they've resisted calls for a full national independent government inquiry into this, and I wonder if that is partly because they don't want to upset the Muslims around this.
And Alistair, please share your thoughts on Elon Musk, the US billionaire who's now part of the Trump administration, who made headlines 2 weeks ago where he put a message on his social media platform X, really saying that Keir Starmer is turning a blind eye to the grooming gangs in order to not offend the kind of Muslim vote, as it were, and he accused Keir Starmer of effectively running shy of confronting the grooming gangs because he was afraid of losing the vote. Share with us your thoughts on that influence on what Elon Musk has said.
Well, I think it needed to be said. Elon Musk, he's kind of getting involved in international politics generally. You know, he's had some things to say about Germany and so on, France, and so I wasn't too surprised that, I mean, he's now a major player on the political front in USA. He's right there alongside President Trump in the build-up or the electorate before the inauguration yesterday, and he's got a lot to say, and he's got a lot of influence because a very wealthy man involved in so many things, and he's using the media, which he's an expert on, to get his views across. But I think what he said needed to be said, because I think, as you said earlier, there's a lot of things that they try to get under the carpet. Just let's hope the media forgets about it and we can just move on, because they don't want the anti-racist card shown at any political party. But it was very interesting. As soon as the story broke through and he confronted our government, the very next Monday, in the Parliament buildings, they were debating and talking about this very issue of the grooming gangs and so on. And these things need to not only be inquired into, you need to take action against it. This is my concern, is we have inquiry after inquiry after inquiry about so many things, and they almost hope that the public will forget about the problem, and then the problem continues because it just has a little rest. And then it raises its head again. It's a little bit like anti-Semitism, you know, it just goes to sleep for a while, but then wakens and comes in stronger. So I'm not necessarily agreeing with any from another nation interfering in politics, but there's certain things that need to be said in order to highlight the problem and make your government reassess things. And I think this was the case with Elon Musk.
Tim, why do you think Keir Starmer and the government is afraid of having an inquiry looking into the grooming gangs? Because clearly for the victims, this is absolutely horrific and it's barbaric, and it's unbelievable that this would actually happen in Britain in the 21st century. Well, so share with us why you think the government doesn't want inquiry.
Simon, this has been going on for 50 years. It's 40 plus, maybe 50 different towns that we know about where it's been going on. It's multiple girls being raped multiple times. I mean, in terms of numbers of rapes, you're talking easily hundreds of thousands of rapes that people could be convicted of if it went all the way. The government has, you know, it's all sparked off because Oldham Council formally requested a government inquiry into it, and the government replied saying, no, we'll just have a local one, that's fine. And when that came out, just at the end of last year, that was what kicked it off, and Elon Musk tweets about it and all this kind of thing. And it's become for the first time an international story, I think. You know, we knew about it a little bit in this country, but now it's international news that people are thinking, gosh, this has been happening for all this time in Britain, and it's been going on, and why haven't the government talked about it, and why hasn't it been properly dealt with, and how come it's still going on, and all of this kind of stuff is, and that's what caused the pressure on the government. And I think, you know, they've then finally announced like 5 local inquiries, one of which is Oldham, and that's the council, of course, requested a government one in the first place. We don't know what towns the other ones will be in. You've got various towns where there haven't been any inquiries like Bradford, and some of the people who've actually been prosecuting this, and some of the victims as well, have said Bradford will be bigger than Rotherham if it finally comes out. And Bradford Council have been resisting an inquiry. Maybe they'll resist an inquiry this time as well, who knows. And if you have local inquiries, you don't have statutory powers to require witnesses to come and give evidence, and you can't properly do it. And part of the problem here, Simon, is that no police officer who turned a blind eye, who refused to prosecute, who didn't attempt to charge somebody with underage sex when they knew that happened or had absolutely solid evidence, even saw it happening in person. No police officer, no social worker. Sometimes we could hear stories of social workers being a witness to a Sharia wedding with an underage girl. None of them have ever actually lost their jobs or been disciplined or held accountable for this. No actual person in authority has been held accountable for it in terms of prosecuting them for malfeasance or misuse of public office or just dereliction of duty, all of that kind of stuff. And until we have a full national inquiry, I'm sceptical it will ever happen. And unless the only way to change the culture is by actually bringing people in authority to account properly for what they've done or failed to do. And then you change the culture. Then people say, well, I better not do that again, because that's what happens. And that I think is what will require a national inquiry properly to deal with.
That's the best argument I've ever heard on this topic, so appreciate that, Tim. And Alistair, I mean, Nigel Farage was in the Telegraph as of this recording today on comments reported to the Daily Telegraph this week, accusing Keir Starmer of a cover-up over the brutal and evil murder that we saw took place in Southport back in July of last year. And it's now officially that this is a terrorist attack, and this is what he said. I was pretty certain from what I've been told very early on that this was a terror-related attack. I wanted to ask questions in Parliament about what the authorities knew about this man, but my rights of parliamentary privilege were taken away and I was not allowed to say anything, which is extraordinary. So, Sheldon, your thoughts on this one?
That's a difficult one, isn't it? The Prime Minister saying he couldn't speak out on what was fairly obvious. I remember seeing the horrendous pictures of what had happened, and I thought this sounds and looks like a terrorist attack. And yet they tried to hide behind it being all sorts of other things, mental problems and all this, rather than a terrorist attack. And he's the Prime Minister now of our nation, so and his background is the law. That's what he was doing before. And for him to say he kind of suspected what was going on, but wasn't able to say, well, I think there are ways of making sure the truth comes out, and I hope he will take some action about it now and make sure that this is dealt with in the right way. Because, I mean, it was horrendous to see some of the reports of 13-year-old girls and 14-year-old girls being accused of being prostitutes, and as if they were the victims, and the perpetrators were, we don't want to upset the cart, so to speak, and accuse them of anything because they are from an Islamic background. Justice is justice. It doesn't matter what background you're from, and if you are doing things which are against the law, you need to be dealt with, and the sooner the better.
Just to clarify for our viewers, you were talking about the grooming gangs and not the brutal attack in.
But it's a similar situation going on. The guy who attacked the kids in Southport, he was prepared, he was trained, he knew what he was doing, and these were innocent young children. These were really 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. But the same thing has happened on the other side, on the grooming gangs, where the victims become the ones who are accused. It certainly wasn't for the 3-year-olds, because they were out there just having dance classes.
And Tim, kind of share your thoughts on Ruda Cabana, who is in court at the moment. He's confessed to murdering these 3 young girls at the dance class up in Southport, which was absolutely horrific. But also the way that, for example, the government clamped down on anyone right at the beginning, saying that this was terrorist-related. They said this was not a terrorist attack. And yet he's found with an Al-Qaeda manual at his home. Deadly poison known as ricin was found under his bed. He'd been looking at horror videos, and just share with us how the government is now trying to redefine terrorism because of this. And clearly what we saw was a cover-up, but why was there such a cover-up when this...
Well, I'm very suspicious of Keir Starmer on this. As Alistair said, he's admitted that he knew all this stuff almost immediately, and yet he was tarring anybody who was making an allegation of terrorism or Islam as far right. The BBC published an article online saying that it was false that he was a Muslim, and stuff like this, and they arrested people who made these allegations and put some of them in prison very, very quickly. And here we are now, 8-9 months later, and we finally get a trial, people waiting, expecting a 4-week trial, and he's just pled guilty, and so we won't see all the evidence, we won't have the cross-examination, we won't get to see what's really done there, and a lot of people are very disappointed about that. And Keir Starmer knew about it, and he's saying that it would prejudice the trial, but I don't see how explaining this chap had been referred to prevent 3 times and they found Al-Qaeda manual in his home would prejudice the trial. It's just fact. You know, they put out this stuff that he's a Welsh lad and he was a Christian family. And while they knew that, you know, he'd got these Islamic issues and so on, and now we gather that he goes to mosque in prison and all of this kind of stuff, you know, and so, you know, I don't understand how you redefine it in this kind of way. You know, they're saying, oh, we can't say he's terrorist until he says that was his motive, and of course he's refusing to say anything in court. And so they say, oh, we can't say it's Islamic then, or he's just a lone wolf person, just wants violence, all this kind of stuff. Well, we don't know all the details because it's not going to come out in court and all of that, and we have to find out, but clearly there was an Islamic-related thing here. Islamic State at the time had been calling for attacks on Taylor Swift concerts. Was that a factor? Was that going to come out in evidence? Would that have been in the trial? Would people have referenced that in the trial? Is it going to be referenced now? Are we going to find out the facts? Well, there's going to be an international inquiry, and I hope that properly deals with it and that properly finds out and properly gets to the bottom of all of this and find out all of these things, and including like whether Keir Starmer was right or wrong to hide all these facts from us and claim, oh, it would be contempt of court to say anything about it, which in other cases they've released information very quickly about this without prejudicing a trial.
Yeah, very helpful, thank you. And Alistair, I mean, we hear a lot from the Islamic community about Islamophobia, but you can't compare Islamophobia to Jew hatred, because as far as I'm aware, if you go into a Jewish school, you have to go through an X-ray machine. Your bags have to go through an X-ray machine. You have to go through an X-ray machine. They have security personnel outside the schools or outside Jewish gatherings or synagogues. Go to a Jewish school, it's got barbed wire fence around it and stuff as well. But I don't see any of these kind of safety measures put in place to protect the Jewish community being applied to the Muslim community, or maybe wrong.
No, I mean, it does look that way from anyone on the outside. There's no doubt that even the word Islamophobia suggests we're kind of obsessed with something where it's not that. It's the facts, you know. These attacks come from people of Islamic background, people from mainly nations such as Pakistan or with their background. Some of them are born in this nation, which does make it a little bit more difficult as to what you refer them to. But there's no doubt that the problems are just being highlighted because they are facts. As Tim just said that. It's not something that people are making up. These are really happening widely. I mean, when Tim's just talked about 50 other cities, towns in the country where there are problems which could be even bigger than Rotherham and Rochdale, and it's a worrying statistic, but it is also a kind of sign that our nation is getting more and more Islamic influence because the population is growing. They are the only part of our population that are growing vastly and quickly, whereas, you know, the English Christian communities are growing by a very small amount every year. And it's strategic. It's not just something that happens. They are planned to be that way to affect our future.
And Tim, back on January the 6th, 2025, The Spectator ran an article where they announced that Keir Starmer's government wants to introduce an Islamic blasphemy law. Share with us your concerns about such law and the impact that this will have on freedom of speech, but also freedom of religion in this country.
Yes, so the APPG definition of Islamophobia has been formally adopted by the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats and the Greens and Plaid Cymru and all the Scottish national parties and so on. And it defines Islamophobia as a type of racism that targets Muslimness or perceived expressions of Muslimness, and that's kind of very, very restrictive. And the actual report that they put out even mentioned grooming gangs and characterising Muslims as grooming gang abusers would be considered Islamophobic. So this kind of is an Islamic blasphemy law. It also gives examples of criticising Muhammad as being Islamophobic. And this is the problem with even the term Islamophobia. It means you can't even criticise Islam as a religion or Islam as an ideology. And that becomes then basically a de facto Islamic blasphemy law. And if you think about it, all those Labour MPs are aware that their code of conduct, Labour Party, includes this APPG definition, and they could be, if they're accused of Islamophobia, they could be suspended or even expelled from the party. So you've basically got an Islamic blasphemy code working for MPs, the majority of MPs in Parliament as it stands today. I'm pleased because Kemi Badenoch raised this in Parliament in PMQs just the other week and said this is an issue. The government therefore is under pressure about it. They've said they want to bring in a definition of Islamophobia, but they're also forced to admit last year, towards the end of last year, that this definition breaches the Equality Act. So they know they can't run with this one. Nevertheless, it still is in their code of conduct. So how do you square all this going on? But I'm very worried that they are going to bring forward some other definition. I think anti-Muslim is the right term to use and is fine and doesn't need any other definition. Anti-Muslim, and you're against the people, not the ideology. And yes, we shouldn't have anti-Muslim. But Islamophobia is a dangerous term just by its nature because it seems like you can't criticise Islam at all itself.
Absolutely. Down to about a couple of minutes, so we have to be very quick. But share with us your thoughts on how this government's changing British foreign policy in order to cater for the Islamic influence in this country, particularly betraying our number one ally, democratic ally in the Middle East, Israel.
Yeah, it affects Israel tremendously. This new government coming in has been very against it, or not against Israel, but certainly not pro-Israel as the previous government was, and that's not a political stand that I'm making. It certainly does affect the policies they're making, because they realise that we've got part of our population, a large part of our population is Islamic, so they are trying to please the Islamic nations, and Islamic people are not exactly favourable towards the Jewish people.
Yep. So within 20 seconds, Tim, share with us how, as Christians, we can push back on this Islamic influence over
it's a spiritual battle. There's 5 pillars of responding to Islam that if I can remember them. One is prayer, because it's a spiritual battle. One is love, because we have to love our enemies and everyone around us. One of them is resisting in the courts and in our culture. One of them is exposing the darkness of what's happening in Islam. And the 5th one has slipped my mind at the moment. But those are the kind of things that we need to do.
5's not bad. So Alistair and Tim, thank you so much for joining me on this week's Politics Today. And I just want to thank you at home. Yes, I think we as Christians have to become increasingly aware that as our nation becomes more secular, we see that there is an Islamist influence filling that gap within our politics. We see that this is shaping the Labour Party's domestic and also foreign policy that we need to be concerned about. So keep praying, and thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.